I'm going to be the reason why everybody at the back complains on Twitter that the slides are too small. So you've heard, and now you don't get any options now. I'm hoping this will, I suppose, well, Mark sort of said process practical. I don't know whether it is or not. Well, I suppose you can tell us at the end. We're trying to look at seeing open access more clearly. I think probably I could just say it's complicated, bow, and then just leave the room. Or we could just all move to freemium, and we wouldn't need any of the next things. But thank you. I suppose first of all, an acknowledgement to our funder, as one is always supposed to do. What I'm talking about is one of the work packages of a JISC Open Access Pathfinder project. There are other projects available, as I've put up there. This really is a strand of funding for 9 open access projects. I think it's nearly 30 universities are involved. It's running up until May this year, and really it's for us to get everything ready for the ref policy. Although when we started, it was a different policy to the one we have at the moment, but we will definitely be ready. I just thought I would also mention other projects because, especially for this conference, there are lots of other projects about how we pay APCs, various other things. But there are also ethnographic studies of how researchers are behaving. There's some guides for researchers who actually want to engage with open access, and there's a self-assessment tool as well. So there is stuff worth looking at on that URL that I've put on far too briefly for you to be able to actually write it down. What I'm going to talk about is the Haloa project. There will be another URL that comes up that you also won't be able to write down because it's too long. I guarantee if you Google Haloa, there aren't any other Haloas that we know of, unless something unfortunate's been invented in the last 6 weeks or so. It is Hull, Huddersfield and Lincoln Open Access, imaginatively titled. Our particular project is really coming from a point of view of 3 institutions, as we've written here, developing research portfolios. So we admit we're not Cambridge, although we do have intentions to one day be Cambridge in 600 or 700 years' time. But one of the things we looked at from these projects is how can we make open access work to our advantage, and how can we, as institutions who want to grow our research portfolios, help to do that. There's lots of things about navigating the policies and various other things, and that's one of the sides that we're looking at, how to get our house in order. Also, though, we want to look at how we can look at open access, embed it, get it part of the workflow, and that's particularly what I want to talk about. So we're going to have a look at some various life cycles that we've put together. I should also mention another project. We've kind of merged projects to do this, and another one is another unpronounceable title, OWL, rhymes with towel. This is something that myself and Jill Emery have done, so it's a US-UK collaboration. For these life cycles, we brought the Haloa and the OWL projects together to have a look at things, because this particular project is looking at how to get really librarians who up to this point have had nothing to do with open access into open access and to understand what's going on. One of the reasons, or a couple of the reasons why I brought this up, is that we want to come up with best practice. We want international examples, and I think we've already heard today that it's very different, say, in the UK, the US, and all the other countries in Europe. The other important thing to say is that both OWL and the Haloa project and these life cycles are completely agnostic when it comes to what open access you want to call, define, or whatever. We're not here to say green is better, gold is better, platinum, whatever. It's really, this is the stuff we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, so here's how we're going to deal with it. So we're not really looking at whether one thing's right or wrong. It doesn't really matter to a certain extent, because we still have to fulfill those mandates, we still have to do various things within the universities. And as I said before, we want to do this to advantage our university. So that's really where we're coming from with both the projects. There's also a competition to have as many different research life cycles as you possibly can. There's one just there, there's one here, ours is green, but not because we like green, it just happens to be green. This is something that Portland State have done. This is their research management team, or their sponsored projects team, as they call it over in Portland. Lots of people are doing this, and I think, strangely, the conversations we've had, lots of people seem to be doing it for the first time. And the first point up there, I think, is really important. Everybody in this room is basically the tip of the iceberg. And I think sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we forget that a huge amount of work has actually gone on before it gets anywhere near publication, or before a librarian goes near it, or anything like that. And I think we do have to understand that, and to a certain extent, we're the very last thing the researchers do before they move on to something else. And I think that's some of the issues we've found with open access, that they've published it, they've moved on, the next funding's come in, or the next piece of research. And there are time constraints, so we've got to kind of get in there while they're keen. And that's one of the points, that they respond if we actually have discussions with them and we know what they're doing. And again, as I've said there, our timelines aren't their timelines. We're all talking about a tiny little piece in their cycle. So even that one down there is only a sort of small bit of all the work that's happened that could have been international work to come up with the publication. So we need to understand what the researchers want. And there's even more. There's lots of, as we've got here, North American versions. So we've got Florida coming up with yet another life cycle. We've got Calgary actually trying to reimagine what librarians need to do, because it is a very different job in the open access world. And we've already discussed about how much work there is involved, and I think you're going to see this in a second as well. So there's a lot of people looking at the same kind of things. So what we've done with the Helloa project is we've tried to imagine different research life cycles. I'm going to quickly go through one for librarians and repository managers, one for research managers, researchers and publishers. For those of you at the back, this is going to be about 10 minutes of nice pastel colours with the odd arrow that you can possibly point out, but bear with me, there's a point. We've done this for the US and the UK as well. I'm not going to go through both, although I will give you a quick example, but they are different, and I think they'll be different in every single country as well. So not only are we faced with understanding the life cycles, we've got different ones. So for the publishers in the audience, you're going to have different life cycles for every community as well. That's the URL that you haven't had time to write down yet. So I'll move on. The first one is the research life cycle for librarians and repository managers. This came out of an initial discussion, again, with the OWL project, of really just explaining to people who weren't dealing with open access every day in the library what was going on, and to try and understand various things. What we did is we found something that Neil Jacobs at JISC OA Services had come up with, which was the 7 stages of the publishing process. Again, very similar to the stages that everybody comes up with. We then tried to map our institutional processes onto these, and not every institution has the same process. We then looked at publisher services, and I've got to say, these are our views of publisher services. They are not a comment on what all the services are. We looked at above campus services, so things that JISCOV, things that are out there, and we also tried to map OWL onto it. So, that's not too bad. Nice pastel at the back. For those of you at the front, like I say, you can probably see bits of it. I'm going to quickly cover my back on publisher services, because there are only 3 things there. I'm not saying you don't do anything else. What I'm saying is those are the touch points. What we tried to do is to understand that cycle and to sort of see where things were going on, who had the information. When I go through these, even if you can't see what's written there, you will see an awful lot of stuff start appearing. And I think that really goes into what Danny was saying before about the sheer amount of people that now have to be involved in this. There is an awful lot to do. A couple of things that we do have, and what we've tried to do as well, because we're being agnostic, is we've got at the bottom the HEFCE and the RC UK mandates at the bottom, and really that's where we need the information. And it's really just to understand the kind of things that we need to do, and the kind of conversations that we need to have. Things were mentioned before this morning about discovery. We've got discovery up there. We've got the fact that there is a need for discovery. It's just because it's open access has been said, if it's not actually discoverable, then there's not an awful lot of point. And that really is something that all of us need to look at. I'm going to whiz on. This is the US one, just to show you. I'm not going to run through this, but there's lots and lots of different stuff. So this is the point. It's different in each country. So up here we've got share and chorus up there and various other things, and we've got the different policies. So we've got things like the Ford and the Gates, which I think, although I'm not totally familiar with them, but a sort of one side, and then the various public policies as well. So again, it's different in different countries. Moving on to the research managers, we've sat down with research managers to go through this life cycle. It's got discussed in the ARMA conference, which is the Association of Research Managers and Administrators. So they've had a look at it. Again, we've put institutional, we put funder liaison because they're talking about funders. We've got above campus, and we've got the sponsored projects life cycle. We haven't put publishers on this one because it's not necessarily where the research managers are coming from. There's lots of arrows now in this one. If you saw, by the way, the size of the screen I have, you are much better off here because I can only see blurred stuff, or I'm getting to a point where I need glasses. We've got different stuff here. This is the kind of stuff that the research managers need to know. The blue stuff is the funders, and then there's all the JISC stuff, so the various Sherpa things, all the policies. And again, this is all the work that we've been talking about. Everything has to be checked and cross-checked and so on and so forth. So there's a lot more work in this particular one. I am going to whiz through these because I'll tell you why in a second. Researchers. We paused at researchers, and I think actually when Danny asked a question from the floor before, she said about researchers, this is what we came up with. This is what we think researchers think. I think everybody in this room hopefully is where the magic happens. That's kind of the impression we got. We did then draw something, and again we're looking at publisher services, funder liaison and things like that. And again, I'm not going to run through every single word on here because that's not the point. There's a lot of stuff there. That's even more stuff that we're asking the researchers to potentially understand or to liaise with than some, potentially the librarians. We're expecting them to know what all the policies are. We're expecting them to understand where their funder contracts are and various other things. We're expecting them to know about discovery, about marketing. We were a little bit cheeky and decided they might want to set up an OA journal of themselves when they've had enough of all this anyway. But actually some are. Some are doing that. We also did sneak in journal choice before submit. We're purely talking about open access, but if you're looking at open access, you will want to choose a journal where you can publish in the way you want to publish. If a particular title is not funder compliant, should you be publishing there? That's just a question we've put out, but I think we've all had journals which are non-compliant from the funder, and we tend to find out after it's been published. So we're sort of saying, yes, there is something that needs to be done there for open access. The point from this is there is a lot of stuff for the researcher to do, and an awful lot more than we were expecting them to look at. Now, this is the one where I think I might get bottled off the stage by suggesting a publisher life cycle without really having actually spoken to any publishers about it. but I'm looking for constructive comments. Again, what we've done with this, and again, please go away and have a look at this. One of the things at this point we thought, well, there's tends now, we need a lot of arrows. There's a lot of data that isn't flowing between funders, between publishers, researchers, research managers and libraries. A lot of us are doing the processes quite well, but we're not necessarily getting that data to flow. And it's not necessarily anybody's fault, but hopefully one of the things we can get from these life cycles is people to have a look. One of our research office people looked at theirs and said, right, we could draw some nodes and data flows here and try and actually understand where all the data's going, because I don't know whether we all do. So hopefully that's one of the outcomes from this. We also thought we need to join the dots on this, because I've just whizzed through very, very quickly, deliberately so to confuse you slightly, a lot of different life cycles. My personal ambition is to build a Star Trek 3D chess set of all the life cycles to link it absolutely perfectly. No one will fund me for this, unless there's anybody here that wants to do that. So instead, and I suppose given that we are reasonably close to the tube, we've come up with a tube map, which is probably far enough away from copyright for us to not be in trouble. This is our attempt to try and map not necessarily the life cycle, but the whole process of what everybody's going through. So we've got, in a kind of pinky colour, the researchers, green are the research managers. So with the researcher, we start with the idea. Interestingly, we had to be told that after a couple of iterations, because we hadn't thought of that. We started with get funding. Someone said, well, maybe they should have an idea first. We've got the research managers. This is the thing about the tip of the iceberg. There's an awful lot going on before it ever gets to the library or the publisher. Publishers in blue, libraries in yellow. One of the things we were also asked to add is a little bit up there, which looks a bit like Mornington Crescent, is Source OA funding, which is increasingly a library job. And quite often we're asked, will you go and find a way that we can pay this? There's lots of dots and everything else. The idea is hopefully you get to make discoverable at the end, and by then it's really that we're suggesting that the researcher has kind of stopped at that point because they've done their bit, then it's over for us. So we'd love to put this out there for various comment. It's had quite a lot of comment. We've had recently some comments from research managers in other universities in the UK who've said they're doing something very similar, and this is very similar to what they're mapping. But I think that's interesting in itself, that we are all looking at this. I don't think we've necessarily written it down before. So, as I said, these are our perspectives. Your perspectives will be different. What we hope is that going forwards, maybe we can have discussions about this and see where the commonalities lie, where we can get the data moving, where we can have discussions, because that's really what it is. And I think, again, there's a lack of common language, a lack of common understanding, that I think if we just have a conversation about it will benefit us all and will hopefully make things more efficient. Just very quickly before I finish, we're also looking at some next steps which could be of interest. Increasingly, open access management, and certainly gold open access management, is merging into journals, e-resource management. This is the next thing. There's another project that we have called Terms, Techniques in E-Resource Management. We're going to look at merging the two, so we can, because we're thinking one of the things we can do is if we can embed OA into everything else that we do, then it's properly embedded. And maybe stop having discussion about here's OA, here's everything else. Say here are e-resources, here's research, what do we do, what common things have we got in the workflows, and to look at that as well. So I shall leave you with that. That is our blog, and I think we're taking questions at the end. So thank you.